Hello, welcome to Roll With It. I'm Nate,
I'm Chris. Welcome
and we're
back.
going to be talking. Well, never mind. Let's try this again. Hello, welcome to Roll With It. I'm Nate,
And I'm Chris. Welcome back.
and we're going to be talking about, for the most part, freezing to death in a very broad sense. So I'm going to give it off to Chris first to explain how movement, horses, and how her view on her little world of being living out in the forest during when it's winter and freezing.
Yeah, so I'll have a little bit more in-depth version of this video over on our new channel, Dargon Gaming Squad, which is launching soon. But yeah, so if you're in a snowy, icy environment, transportation is going to be a big deal, getting around. For players who are PCs who are just traveling via foot, you have things like, deep snow that slows you down. It becomes difficult terrain. Situations where, the snow will kind of crust over and you'll kind of break through, adding more work to moving through the snow. If it's a really soft powder, then it's heavy, but it's kind of dragging along with you as you go. So you have to think about how would you get around if you're on foot? Do you have snowshoes or maybe cross-country skis, depending on the setting? What is your GM going to allow? Do you require some sort of a special training that the GM is going to require of you to make that happen? Or maybe in his world there's some ice spikes or something that you can put on your feet if you're going to be traversing icy territory. So you have all of those kinds of things. Horses or mounts, what type are they? If they're horses actually have a much more difficult time moving in snow than people realize. And of course, all the same factors are going to apply for them. If you're moving through snow, it's going to slow you down. Just because they have four legs doesn't mean it's any easier to drag them through really deep snow. Or imagine like chest high. In addition to that, if horses have shoes on, the snow tends to ball up and become a ball of ice inside their hoof. So as players, you have to think about, where are we going? Are we making a quick trip up into the mountains and we're coming back to where we started? Can we leave the horses behind? Or are we traveling through and we need our horses, so maybe we have to figure out how to get from point A to point B? Are we dismounting? Are we riding? That sort of thing. And you can really ease up, make it easier on your horse by getting off and dismounting. But if you're trying to move quick, you might be better off leaving them back in town, right? And so then also thinking about other kinds of transportation, maybe sled dogs, maybe polar bears or caribou, reindeer, that sort of thing. So really thinking about that. The other thing is thinking about, now this is more the GM side, but thinking about the hazards. Snow falling off trees falling down because they're burdened with ice, or if it's windy. Lots of hazards in the forest. And the other thing is shelter. Maybe the GM is going to be really nice and have a nice little cozy cabin that you come across, but maybe not. So how are you going to find shelter? The trees, depending on the type of forest, gosh, I'm getting into a lot of the same stuff that's in the other video. Trees don't necessarily provide a lot of shelter, so you have to think about that. I get more in depth with that in my other videos, so go check that out. But you have to think about shelter. Are you building something? Are you putting up a tent? Are you finding natural shelter, cave, something like that? What's your DM putting in your environment? Are you, way above the tree line and there's nothing but snow? Are you in the forest? What do you got? So Nate, as a GM, what kind of considerations do you include in your game with regards to the weather?
Well, actually, now that everybody's going into a cold environment, I have a whole new system I set up. But first, before we get in that, I actually want to talk about the actual effects of hypothermia on somebody today. This is the medical side of it, and something I'm kind of interested in because of my own profession one day. But mild. So this is something where basically my players aren't quite freezing quite yet, but they're slowly their body temperature starting to decrease a little bit. The things you're going to experience is shivering, high blood pressure, a faster heart rate, a faster respiratory rate, and a contraction of blood vessels. This is your body's attempt to try increasing the amount of heat production you have, because most of the heat in your body is produced via your heart, your muscles in your body, and your liver, actually. And when you start shivering, you can increase this to 2 to 4 times the amount that you regularly would. And so basically your extremities will start getting colder as it tries retaining all the heat in the core where it's most important. To remind you, you lose about 90% of the heat from your body, from your skin, and then the other 10% from your lungs. So even if you're covered up, you're still losing some by breathing the cold air, obviously. Moderate. This is where my players will start taking a 1d4 of damage. This is when your body starts shivering, becomes much more violent. It starts making it harder to walk. Miscoordination becomes very apparent. So dexterity rolls would have a disadvantage. Moving would become slower. You'd be kind of confused at this point. So wisdom saves would be at a disadvantage. And while people might appear to be alert, blood vessels, essentially, since they start contracting so much, you appear to look blue in your lips, your ears, your fingers, and it starts to actually hurt. This, and then it goes to severe, which is where my players start taking a D8 of damage for every hour they spend outside. Your vital signs start to dwindle. Your heart rate, your respiratory rate, and your blood pressure all decrease. And this is generally, your heart rate will start resting in the 30s, around 82 degrees at the core temperature. This is when it starts going downhill. You won't be able to speak as well. Very sluggish thinking, amnesia, inability to use hands, and stumbling is quite prevalent. At this point, even walking is difficult. They wouldn't be able to move. You just become almost useless. There's something else that happens during this too, which I find kind of interesting. It's called paradoxical undressing. This is once people get so cold, they start taking off their clothes. Why we do this, I'm not quite sure. I'm not a psychologist, so I can't say anything about this too much yet, but it's very interesting. This is why a lot of times when they first find people that froze to death, they might be naked, and they usually think it's a sexual assault, when really it's not. It's just something we do. We get confused. We think our skin is burning, so we take off all our clothes, and it actually causes us to die faster. And after that, then it's usually death. Things get too cold. Ice begins to form inside the body, starts ripping things apart, which is called frostbite. Your brain stops working, your heart slows down, stops working. It just doesn't become great for anybody. One thing I do want to kind of bring up too, especially about this, there is points in which your body can nearly freeze. It's not quite frozen, and it's called, let me see if I can get the name up. It's called frostnip. It's a superficial cooling of the tissues without cellular destruction. So that means no ice crystals have formed, but it's basically almost frozen. I just thought that was kind of funny. Another thing that I also want people to kind of think of too when they're out in the frozen area is the constant wetness of your foot. You end up getting trench foot because you get snow in there. It would melt if you're not freezing, obviously. And you would slowly start to have true problems with your feet, as we also have seen a lot in World War I. And if you want to know more about that, I can maybe do another more in-depth video on our own channel, or you could always look it up. It's always very interesting stories you can get from that.
I'm sure that's also partially because you're sweating, and
yeah,
you're sweating your feet. It's one of the first things we learn in Girl Scouts about staying warm outdoors is if you start to get cold, to change your socks. Because even though you're maybe not aware that your socks are getting damp, they are, because you're sweating. And it's true that the minute you change your socks, you definitely get warmer pretty quick. It makes a big difference. So I'm sure that's one of the things that leads to trench foot. It's not having an opportunity to do that.
One thing I forgot to bring up, especially maybe if like you're trying to show an event where maybe a lot of people died and your party's coming across it, or maybe your party is experiencing this, hopefully not. It's called something called terminal burrowing. This is our own innate senses that kind of kick in, and it tells humans to basically burrow like you would see wolves do when it gets really cold, or just try to get in a confined space to truly keep ourselves, trying to keep us more warm. Um, and that's what you're generally going to see in the very last stages of hypothermia. People will bury themselves or try to get in really small areas, or even kind of group up together. So another thing to think about if you want to make it more realistic and kind of morbid.
So I have a question about the disadvantage. So mechanic that you mentioned. Do you do a flat out disadvantage then, or do you? I know sometimes in our second edition game, our DM will have us just subtract points rather than a flat out disadvantage roll. So do you take that into consideration, or have you been having us do flat out disadvantage?
I've been having you guys do flat out advantage right now, but also haven't had a lot of experience that with you guys actually going to the cold yet. So I might actually think about that, because it seems like D&D 5e especially is very much either your advantage or disadvantage, and it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of number memorization. But that'd be kind of interesting, instead of maybe just giving us complete disadvantage on your wisdom or strength or dexterity, to actually just have it kind of more of subtract, maybe like 5 points for each stage of like starting to freeze. So maybe between moderate and severe. So moderate would be -5, severe could be -10. But
Yeah.
no, that's actually pretty good. That's a pretty good point. But to kind of talk about the mechanics in a way that I started doing the freezing death, since we can't really find anything really truly substantial in the book, I started off as a base of 10. So everyone has a basic cold threshold of 10, and their survival, nature, or their constitution score can add to that, and that'll basically be their base stock point, if you so want to say, like their base of how much they can stand before they start experiencing mild hypothermia. After that, every 2 points over, so say I roll a d20 and I'll add some sort of score to it that kind of makes sense. So let's say if they're in the tropics and I roll d20 for temperature, it might stay around like having a -8 to cold temperatures, or +8 to warmer temperatures, to kind of keep it a nice medium area. But say if I'm rolling, if they're in a tundra, I'll have a more like +8 to the cold that day. Or maybe depending if it's a storm that day or if there's winds, I'll add extra. So I'll roll the d20, and basically it goes above their score that they have set. So say if Chris has a 10, and then she has a survival skill of +6, 16. So if it hits at 16, she's experiencing mild hypothermia. No damage, but she'll start feeling cold, and then she can role play that, and that's just flavor. As soon as it starts going 2 points up, let's say, so instead of being 16, it was 18 that day, she'll experience moderate hypothermia, which is a 1d4 damage every time she's outside of the cold. And then as well, she'll start getting maybe just a penalty to strength and dexterity rolls.
Or, are you having a time component for that? Like,
yeah, I'm adding a time. Yeah. So the first hour, generally, you're going to stay warm enough without taking any damage. The second hour, you're going to start feeling cold. You're going to start taking damage. And that's when the true freezing starts to begin. And also, as well, as night comes, you have to think that it gets much, much colder. While we don't experience a whole lot of freezing out here in Las Vegas, Nevada, we do see at night grass and water will start to freeze in certain areas. It just it gets a lot colder, especially in deserts. It's almost crazy how quickly sand will lose heat. So, yeah, just kind of something to think about. You're free to take the way I do it if you wish to, or you're free to make your own. Definitely is worth adding, though, and adding a good flavor, because instead of making just enemies the only enemy that you can fight, living creatures, goblins, orcs, whatever you wish to call it, now it's also the players versus the environment, where they kind of have to figure out how to survive in the cold, what they're going to do that day, if they're going to set up a camp. And there's certain, I'm going to totally let you guys do whatever you want. I mean, obviously, there's certain advantages to having a tent per se, or instead of having a tent, going into a cave, or instead of going into a cave, maybe even having some sort of a magical barrier that stops heat. These are all things that you should all hopefully be thinking about, especially when doing cold campaigns.
Right. Leomund's tiny hut.
Yeah, Lehman signing out.
You have a magic user who has access to that spell. It's a great spell. Keeps you warm, keeps you protected.
What if it's like a magical cold that can also cold, like make Lehman's tiny hut cold too?
Yeah, then you're in trouble. But hopefully the DM's not that evil.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. We did have in our second edition game a situation where we were in the hut and something did manage to breach it. So it's only happened once so far, but it did happen. So that's like always in our minds of like, ooh, are we really going to be safe when we put this hut up? So, you know,
I mean, yeah, isn't it just like a little
to the flavor.
It is a really cool spell though. As lucky you guys got out of it though.
It is a very cool spell. It's definitely handy, and so I'm always, having to, my character's always like, I gotta conserve my third level's, spell, so to speak. Like she's always trying to conserve enough energy and, magic reserve to be able to still cast that at the end of the day. So,
yeah, tell us what you think about the cold. Tell us what things that you have done. I know there's actually some homebrew pictures where they talk about the cold, and they have a really good system as well. But let us know if you found this entertaining at all, if you found it useful, any good information you could take away and put into your own world. Or even if you just have a comment about something like you don't like my pink shirt, please put it down.
We'll post some links below too so that you can reach us if you'd like Nate to share his mechanic for the cold in a written form for you. So you can email us or contact us on Facebook and we can do that for you.
All right. Well, thank you for watching and making it all the way through.
Thank you.
May the dice roll in your favor.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. If I can find the stop broadcast button,